This project is, while it is titled Exit 26, I-83 Exit 26, it's certainly about the interchange, but it's really more about the land use plan around it, planning for the potential for that interchange in the future. So it's very much a long-range planning activity, kind of thinking about the scenario and the possibility and what that might mean for this planning area. So it's not per se a highway planning assignment or design of the interchange itself. So we want to keep that in view, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as the evening goes on. Because it's a land use planning project, it's the municipalities who really have jurisdiction over setting land use policy for the future. So this project is really owned by Conewago Township, East Manchester Township, and Manchester Borough, those municipalities that have lands within about a 5-minute drive time of Exit 26, or where that would be located at Canal Road on Interstate 83. Chuck Zitnick from Conewago Township has joined us this evening. He's got some opening remarks to give. Chuck, I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Zitnick, Chairman of the Conewago Township Planning Commission. I want to welcome all to meeting number 2 for the Exit 26 Land Use Planning on behalf of Conewago, East Manchester, Manchester Townships, and Manchester Borough. We're very interested in this planning endeavor due to the growing traffic problems, just like other municipalities. We long had fewer problems being rural between north and south metro areas, but that's no longer the situation. Our truck and car traffic partly originates locally, but a large portion is often passed through, wanting to use exit 28 at Strinestown and Canal Road east-west. The traffic was not deterred by development interest. Of note, in Conewago, we have pending 2 more warehouses and a 450-acre master plan village. A new exit 26 would greatly smooth area traffic. As we have to wait for the state and federal decision on the new interstate access point, the municipalities in the planning area are considering how an additional interchange would affect our policies about land use. We can't prescribe or prohibit development, but we can manage the location and intensity of uses and their associated impacts. Tonight's presentation will help you understand the alternatives the municipalities are weighing. We look forward to your feedback through the survey that opens later this evening. I'm now going to turn back to Michelle Bromer to continue the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. We appreciate your giving out a welcome to our audience tonight. A quick overview here about the things that we'll cover in tonight's presentation. We want to review the project purpose just a little bit, kind of again, sort of that emphasis on the land use portion of things as a way to lay an even foundation for the discussion that follows. We want to certainly focus on presenting the alternatives that the committee is starting to look at. We want to, as background to that, give you, share some of the results from Public Survey 1, and I see many of you participated in that. Tracy Vernon will also recap some of the market and stakeholder perspectives that we have also learned about as a result of doing some research, so that we can provide a real balanced viewpoint and perspective to the committee as they consider what the best and most appropriate land use alternative for the future will be. We want to spend some time introducing those pictures to you. What do those future land use maps look like? What are the distinctions that they have from one another, so that you can begin to think about which one might be best suited from your perspective. We'll talk about some benefits and some impacts associated with those. We'll introduce and walk you through Public Survey 2, so that when that opens up later tonight and you get around to taking it over the course of the next couple of weeks, you arrive at that MetroQuest survey and you're confident you know sort of how to work through the tools and the questions that are presented there. So we'll give you a demo of that in a little while. We've got some interim opportunities for questions. If you're looking for clarification on things that we're presenting, we want to make sure that information is presented clearly. And if there's outstanding questions, we will compile some results or responses to that and get them posted back on the website. Wanted to just make mention of our team. You'll see some of our faces as we present, but there's others working behind the scenes tonight. Chuck is here from Conewago Township, but there are other representatives from the other municipalities sitting in so that they can hear firsthand the same presentation that the public is getting, and be aware that what's going into sort of the public dialogue in terms of the survey preparation and the feedback that we're looking for. But they will be the ones deliberating sort of on that land use selection in the coming months. From the York County Planning Commission, we have a number of staff, Director Felicia Dell, Will Clark, the Transportation Planner, Ben and Roy Livergood also joining us this evening. And our planning team, myself, Michelle Brummer, apologies for not introducing myself sooner. Tracy Vernon is also with us tonight. You'll hear from both of us as we tag team the presentation. And our behind the scenes support is Jay Scott and Michaela Mummer from York-based Devon. A couple of virtual meeting reminders for you. The meeting is being recorded. Not everyone was able to attend at this particular time. We want to make sure people have access to the detailed information about the alternative. So we'll be posting the recording within a day or two on the I-83 exit26.com website. In order to make that recording really clear, we've muted all the attendees or participants for this meeting, and we'll use the Q&A feature to ask you to submit questions as they come to mind, and we'll take the opportunity at those interim points then to try and answer those for you. The chat feature is not one we're using during this meeting. If you are listening in by phone, or if you are watching live on Facebook and leave a comment there, we'll be reviewing those comments after the meeting and posting any responses shortly thereafter. This website, I suspect if you have registered for the meeting, you've been there at least once, maybe a couple of times. Again, that's where we're posting information about the project, various meeting notices and contact information. And I'll give you some updates on some things that are relatively new there and what's coming up next in just a few minutes. As we started the meeting, we had a couple of these polling questions asking about our audience. I just wanted to run through them briefly. Certainly asked if folks participated in the first meeting, and most of you did, 7 out of 10. A couple of new faces though, so thank you for joining us and taking interest. Even higher rates, or about the same rate for participation in the public survey. Doesn't mean that those individuals broke across those questions the same way, but again, 7 out of 10 have some history with giving input to the project or learning about it. So thanks for taking an interest today. We also wanted to ask how folks heard about the meeting. That tells us how to best promote future information, be it about virtual meetings online, as well as when we get to kind of review and adoption at the municipal level, how the municipalities can best get that information into the hands of the folks who are most interested in it and have a stake in it. So it looks like the email sent out from the York County Planning Commission, which was a collection of the survey response data, as well as the previous meeting registration. That certainly is sort of the lead on how folks heard about this, but all of our methods are sort of reaching some portion of your audience. So we are glad to see that is working. Thanks for answering those. We have one more polling question for you later in the meeting this evening. All right. Since we do have some new faces, I wanted to kind of recap what Will Clark had presented at the first meeting in terms of why this project and why it's focused on the land use plan. If you're interested in more details than I provide in this summary, you can visit the website and look for the meeting 1 recording. And his opening in the first few minutes kind of covers this in a little bit greater detail. So we wanted to touch on it here for new folks joining us into the project this evening, but then move quickly on to the land use alternatives portion and how we used information to frame those options. So this study came about, this land use plan, or the need for it, because PennDOT took a look at the I-83 corridor through this portion of York County. Looking forward in terms of, how's this road, its condition over the next number of years, what kind of maintenance or possible reconstruction may be needed. And as they look at that, they're also looking at the sort of adjacent state roadway network, those feeder routes that provide access to and from Interstate 83, because all of those things need to be considered as a major construction project for the interstate is on the horizon. So they prepared this I-83 master plan for exits 26 to 28, just this segment in York County, and identified a number of projects, recommended projects for sort of improvements, somewhat to the interstate itself. And we've listed here the first one, reconstruction and widening to 6 lanes from the 4 lanes it is today. Also some interchange improvements, some ramp adjustments and modifications. The proposed exit 26, I'll talk about that in just a minute. A number of intersection improvements dealing with kind of turning lanes and signal updates and those sorts of things. We've listed those here. A couple of other locations were looked at and weren't identified at this point for major improvement, but I think they still remain on the radar in terms of how projects in this whole area play out over time, and those locations may be revisited as further decisions are made. Let me circle back to the exit 26 interchange for just a moment. Exit 24 is really the one that has, I think, the highest congestion, and Will talked about this kind of at length in the first meeting, and really sort of sits at the top of the list in terms of needing to be addressed. In order to make improvements, they certainly could be large scale and try and address all that's needed at exit 26, but there was also consideration given to what if there was an additional interchange created at Canal Road. Its number would be exit 26, lining up with the mile markers, and that would help to provide an additional access point to and from the interstate, allow traffic to distribute across those two interchanges, or perhaps even to some extent divert some from exit 28, provide a little more balance in traffic flow, and perhaps not require such extensive improvements, particularly at exit 24. So that recommendation and consensus on that direction was reached in the master plan. I also wanted to mention their master plan did include kind of a concept sketch for an interchange, really just to put a placeholder on the map in the document in PennDOT's sort of list of projects to be prepared for. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, whether it'll be the Diamond Interchange, kind of like sample footprint shown there, or one of the other interchanges along the I-83 corridor in this region. That'll be determined as a design project in and of itself, with consideration for a number of both traffic and environmental factors that would shape what that footprint ultimately looks like. So that too is not our task this evening. But what we do need is a land use plan to prepare ourselves for what development pressure is here today, as well as what might be coming. The need for the interchange was established in the master plan. That is proceeded to a formal point of access request to PennDOT and the Federal Highway Administration for approval. Being that it's an interstate, those are the entities that really have the decision-making authority about whether a new interchange can and should be permitted, not necessarily built. That comes with a funding question, and that'll come next. So a point of access study has been prepared, has been submitted to PennDOT District 8 for review as the most local PennDOT engineering district, as the responsible district. Once that meets the requirements that they see, it needs to document certain conditions and so forth. It'll be advanced to central office for review and approval. And if it receives that, it'll go on to Federal Highway Administration for consideration. We don't have an exact timeline for that. Each point of access study takes its own course in terms of how it's reviewed and the level of information and detail that they provide in terms of response or questions that they might have about that. It's going to be unique to each access study. We've estimated, or York County MPO has estimated, that it may be about 2 years till we receive a final response on that. After that, still there would need to be decisions about what funding sources to use for which projects, given that there are a number of different recommended projects in the master plan. Certainly the timing of each of those, which should come first and which could come later, those sorts of things need to be prioritized, as well as optimizing funding sources at the state and federal level. Certainly would be opportunities for some local input to those improvements. But that funding question is really quite a large and substantial one. And in order to use that or program those projects over with the funding that York County MPO is allocated for its transportation planning program, it would certainly take a number of years to work through those that project list and allocate funding for the exit 26. So there's certainly a big timeline here before traffic would actually start to flow on any ramps exactly at interstate at exit 26. But the potential for an improved interstate access certainly starts to raise interest from a number of stakeholders in the planning area, and perhaps even at its just outside. Municipalities certainly have already been presented with some development plans within this planning area, and some of them have entailed rezoning requests. That development that is already sort of on the table or in the pipeline, as we might say, has some requirements or improvements that may be associated with it in terms of local roads and utilities, or changes to certain public facilities, sort of new service demands or an increase in service demands. And it takes time for the municipalities to sort of, like, on their side, work on the programming. How are they going to fund it, whether it be general funds or other grant fundings, to make those kinds of improvements. So there's time needed for them to put those sorts of things in place as well. That development pressure is likely only going to increase if an interchange is approved. And then we've got that 10-year window at least till the interchange would actually be constructed. So the municipalities agree that having a land use plan that would be ready to implement when that decision is reached would be really useful. It would enable them to coordinate land use across the 4 municipalities that are represented by this planning area. Municipalities work within their own jurisdictions to set those policies, but working together, they can work on a more compatible and more agreeable sort of program that is best for everyone. So working on this land use plan together, the coordination is particularly important, given that the traffic flows are certainly going to cross those municipal boundaries. The development pressure may be different for different types of uses in different areas. We want to sort of have all that on the table as we look at what the sort of ultimate land use plan ought to be. Our planning process started over the summer, and we had a first public meeting in September to kind of introduce the project and talk about some of the existing conditions. We've worked through survey 1 and gotten input for folks on what their first thoughts are on what they'd like to see as far as land uses in the planning area. So here we are now at sort of our options layer in our planning process, right on target for November with our meeting tonight and survey opening later this evening. From here, we expect to have a draft land use plan ready for kind of comment and feedback, additional feedback at a meeting in late January or sometime in February before it moves into municipal review and adoption kind of process that would make it official municipal policy and something they could then implement through zoning once those decisions that are coming down in our process timeline as each of those decisions is reached. We've got a couple of months yet to go yet, but we're sitting sort of squarely in the middle here of our planning process and looking forward to your feedback. This is the I-83 Exit 26 website. Right now it's being used to provide information about the land use planning effort. And as things progress with the interchange and so forth, it may evolve beyond that. But for the time being, this is our local focus. On the left-hand side, there's a blue panel here, and these are documents that you can access related to certainly the master plan itself, but then the particular maps and some of the documents that we've been preparing as part of this planning effort. Our public meeting 1 recording is there, and then a summary of our survey results is also posted there. On the right-hand side, more information will be coming. Those are the kinds of things we expect to post in the coming weeks and months. So you can kind of see things move from the right over to the left as they get populated and executed. I expect we'll see you back here for the survey link later tonight or in the coming weeks, and then again to register for the next meeting in January. This is our last polling question for tonight. We wanted to ask how often you all travel through the planning area, whether that's every day or once or twice a week, or perhaps maybe a little less frequently. Will, can you pop up this poll and we'll get some response here? All right, just about everybody has given us some input here. A couple more responses coming in, but certainly the majority of you are either local residents or local workers. who are traveling through this part of York County on a very, very regular basis. So thanks for sharing that information with us. All right, we wanted to take just a minute and particularly for folks who have joined us for the first time, see if there are any questions on sort of the need for preparing this plan and having something not ready to implement tomorrow, but having ready for that point in time when a decision is reached on the interchange. You can use the Q&A feature, which is typically at the bottom of the Zoom screen for participants. And if there's something you'd like to ask, we'll give a minute or two for those questions to come in. If there's nothing, we can certainly move on, but wanted to provide an opportunity for folks to chime in. And if you rather ask something of me or our staff after the meeting, contact information is listed there. You're welcome to take that down and get in touch at your convenience. Jay, do you see anything coming in on the Q&A list?
No, I don't have any open questions right now, Michelle.
Okay.
Oh, here's one. Sorry, one just came in. What are the general results of the first questionnaire?
Sure. So the first survey, we're going to go into that next, actually. I'm going to have Tracy tell you a little bit about those results, and we've got some bar charts to explain the sort of 3 key questions that we were asking there and show you some of the feedback. So we're going to go there next. We're ready to segue into our next section. Thank you very much. Anything else, Jay?
That's all we got for now.
Okay. Well, folks, if you have other questions, feel free to pop them in there. We'll check that again as we get to the end of the next couple of sections here. All right. So as I said, I've asked Tracy Vernon to present this portion of the meeting tonight. We wanted to share with you sort of what folks said, and certainly we'll tell you who they were. We collected some demographic information. That's going to be on sort of the last slide of this section. But this was an important part to give folks an opportunity who live, work, travel through, or have some other relationship with the planning area, an opportunity to think about and tell us what they think the planning area should look like, or the pieces that it should include in the decades ahead. So Tracy, would you like to go ahead?
Good evening, everyone. Glad everyone could join us tonight. So as Michelle indicated, what I'm going to do is just give you a quick overview of the first survey. And this evening, a little bit later on, we will be showing you the second survey and giving you a little bit of instructions on how to complete that. So for the first survey, we had about 253 respondents, and we asked a series of questions. And the first was, what's important to you? So in the Exit 26 planning area, what are the land uses that are most important? And as you can see on the screen, farms and agriculture and open space and recreation were those land uses that were most important to survey respondents. Although you can see on the bar chart there that at least half of the respondents for this particular question, which was 233 respondents, you can see up in the right-hand corner of the screen, indicated that all land uses were priority in the planning area. So if we can move on to the next slide. So then the next few slides that we'll go through identify what we should plan for in the planning area. And for different opportunities like farms or agriculture, open space recreation, or housing, we provide several different options or land use patterns to choose from. So on the screen now, you'll see that there are the responses for farms and agricultural uses. And you can see that small scale farms, those farms that are less than 100 acres, that might offer some agritourism, agritainment activities were the most highly rated of the farmland types. So a ranking of low, as you'll see for large scale farms, it goes up to a ranking of high. Next slide, please. And the next opportunity for land use types we asked for, so which uses to plan for, were places for industry. And you'll see on this slide that a light industrial, professional, medical office space, or professional office space were a little bit more highly preferred or ranked or had a higher preference than heavy industrial or warehouse distribution. There were a total of 217 survey respondents to that particular question. And the final land use type that we'll go for, which uses to plan for, were places to live. So you'll see that large lot single family were ranked highest out of all the different types of choices. You'll see senior housing, small lot single family, townhomes. And now the land use that were the residential land use type that was least preferred were apartments and condominiums. So that just gives you an idea of the different types of land uses to plan for. The next portion of the survey, we asked folks to identify, if you had a preference, where would you like to see these different land uses? So we had different map markers for each type of land use that we asked survey respondents to place on the screen. So you'll see on the slide here, for farms and agriculture, we had 432 survey responses or map markers that were placed on the map. And you'll see that they were throughout the planning area. This shows commercial responses. We had 137 map markers placed in the planning area, and you can see those are congregated around exit 26, the proposed exit 26. And for industry responses, you'll see also that respondents placed their map markers primarily around the proposed exit 26 area. For places to live, it was pretty diverse throughout the planning area, but certainly around the proposed exit 26, there were map markers for places to live and along the Susquehanna Trail. And we also asked folks to identify places for public facilities, which is shown on the screen. And then finally, we asked if there were opportunities for redevelopment, reusing existing properties or parcels within the planning area, where would you see those? So 80 respondents placed map markers on different locations throughout the planning area. And then to wrap up, who took the survey? Most of the survey's respondents live and work locally, live in the area, as you'll see in the chart on the top left-hand of the screen. And although all household incomes were representative, most of the survey respondents earned $100,000 or more per year.
Tracy, thanks for going over those results. We did see another question come in. Sorry, Jay, I'm stealing your thunder there. If anyone could, if folks didn't get a chance to respond to the first survey, were there opportunities to chime in? And I would say the first survey has closed and we're getting ready to open up number 2. But if you have particular preferences, sort of based on the characterization of these questions that Tracy gave, you're certainly welcome to email me. Contact information is throughout this presentation, but also on the website in terms of, you know, preferences for the kinds of uses that ought to be considered and planned for any particular locations that you would suggest, or in other instances, perhaps say wouldn't be appropriate for a use that you think we might see pressure for. So you're welcome to just to email those comments in. The public meeting 1 recording at the tail end of that would also have a walkthrough of the questions without the results here, but how the questions were phrased originally. Somebody could use that as kind of a template for outlining remarks to email into our project team. Thanks for letting me interrupt on that. Our next section, I'm going to ask Tracy to continue, is that the public preferences are certainly important so that the committee of municipal stakeholders, elected officials, and appointed officials and staff have a sense of what the public's preferences are. We also want to be able to share with them some market and stakeholder perspectives where the private sector, where property owners and others see the pressures coming in so that we can characterize that well for them and give kind of a balanced view. So Tracy, I'll let you proceed with this section too.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. So we had the opportunity to speak to several different stakeholders, about 15 altogether. And what I'm going to do is run through what we heard from a residential market perspective, commercial market from the office and retail. Then we'll also talk about industrial. So I'll first talk about the residential market. So what we heard, and everyone who lives in York County probably already knows this, is that The demand for housing in the county exceeds the supply that you currently have. So according to the Realtors Association of York and Adams County, what you're experiencing now in York County is the fastest moving housing market that they identified in the history of the county. Homes are on the market for an average of 7 days. And just to put that into perspective, a balanced market where supply of housing equals demand is 60 days. It's a very fast-paced market. And also the 2020 home inventory is down 47% from 2019. So there's just not that amount of supply of residential product to meet the demand that exists in the county. A quick summary, the commercial office perspective. So what we heard, and this was provided by Rock Commercial Real Estate from their second quarter 2020 market reports, the office market supply is sufficient. And you'll see in the middle of the screen, the vacancy rate within York County is lower than the national average, about 14%. So that's a good thing for the county. So there is not as much vacancy in your office market product. The total inventory is just over 13 million, and the average lease rate is trending upward a little bit in the county. But again, the office market is pretty stable in the county. And a lot of the office market has been influenced by the pandemic. Now we'll talk about the retail market. So the supply, so the existing square footage, which is a little over 28 million, or close to 29 million square foot, the supply exceeds the demand. So there's more retail market or product on the market. And a lot of that, as we all know, is being driven by e-commerce. So as folks are purchasing more online, the bricks and mortar stores are in decline. So you'll see here the vacancy rate of the county, it's trending upwards. So it's a little bit higher than the national average. And there's a net absorption, meaning there's that market supply. We've not seen an increase in people using or leasing those market spaces. The average lease rate is 10.89 dollars per square foot, so that's declining. So what that's is telling us, according to Rock Commercial Real Estate, is that the bigger box leases or the mall leases are converting more to convenience street retail uses, and the market rate per square foot, or the lease rate per square foot, is smaller. Then moving on to the industrial market, the demand is high, and from what we've heard, not only from Rock, but also from York County Economic Alliance, and many of the stakeholders that we talk to, is the county's excellent labor force and the location with Interstate 83 and also the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It's prime for industry. So there's over 80 million square feet of industrial market. So this is warehouse and manufacturing use. Your vacancy rate is lower than the national average. And there's a lot of new inventory that's proposed and under construction. At the beginning of the call, Chuck mentioned a few properties as well, or a few in Conewago Township. So right now the new inventory proposed or under construction is about 8.5 million square feet. So then stakeholder perspective, just want to give you an idea of some of the information that we obtained through calls that we had with stakeholders. This is certainly not all the information that we heard, but just a snapshot. We talked to property owners who owned agricultural used or types of lands, developers, York County Economic Alliance, and others. So from preservation perspective, it was thought that it's too late for preservation of traditional agriculture, and preservation should have occurred potentially back in the late 1980s, before the warehouse industrial development began along the route or I-83 corridor. Farm-based businesses are expanding and starting to evolve in new different types of operations. We heard solar farms, agrivoltaics, which is a combination or co-locating a farm and solar, agritainment activities. We also heard from stakeholders that if you put more residential uses within the planning area, that would likely require school districts to redistribute students and potentially build new facilities. And on the next slide, it was identified that we need, or you need in York County, more places for folks to work. So provide more opportunities from those younger folks who are graduating from local schools, give them an opportunity to stay in the York County area. From a warehouse distribution perspective, we heard that, again, it's highly being influenced by e-commerce and proximity to consumers, and everything is being accelerated by the global pandemic. And another key item that we heard is that water-intensive uses, such as food processing, which use a lot of water and therefore discharge a lot of wastewater effluent, they would not be directed within the planning area typically. They would be directed towards other locations of York County that have greater capacity for wastewater treatment. And then also, and finally, we heard that there's a need for truck parking in the area. So as truck drivers are coming in and arriving early to their destinations or leaving, they need locations for rest and breaks as they're moving along. So those are the highlights that we heard from the stakeholders that we spoke to. And we'll move on next, and Michelle will talk about land use planning and considerations and future alternatives.
Thanks, Tracy. I think it was important that folks had an opportunity to hear sort of some of the other viewpoints that we heard from, not just the details of what the survey found, because it all needs to be sort of taken into consideration and given sort of a balanced view as we look at land use into the future. I wanted to kind of characterize land use plans a little bit as a blueprint. And that word, you know, I don't want to quite take it literally, because a blueprint is what you follow, you know, to sort of build a house or a complex or a structure or something. And there's always some adaptation that happens along the way. Land use planning, you know, it certainly gives us direction, and it tells us the kinds of things that we'd like to see within the future on the landscape, as part of our built environment, but also things that we'd want to limit or sort of manage what their location or their intensity is. But the important thing is to really have kind of a vision that provides us with a predictable and compatible land use plan pattern, one that we can sort of count on, that we know some of the things that are going to happen and some of the things that aren't going to happen. It gives us kind of a box to reference, to work within, even if we might, there are occasions when the edges of that framework get stretched a little bit. Each new land use brings a combination of things with it. And I don't want to say just new land uses, even existing land uses. There's activities that happen on a site, travel to and from, that impact a local community and its environment. There may be activities that have kind of sensory or environmental impacts. So those are things to consider. It's not just what structure is built and what it looks like, but also even kind of the lot coverage that it takes up. And that relates to stormwater, which is a topic that's certainly got a lot of much more focus in recent years, and a lot more planning attention in terms of trying to protect water quality by looking at the development and the footprint that we put onto the landscape. We have to consider that the decisions that we make in a land use plan are going to influence what's going to be built in the years to come, and those things may be in place for many years to come. So we don't want to make these decisions lightly. We want to do our best to think them through. Providing a predictable plan, what's permitted, what's not permitted, is just as important as to how compatible things are, and minimize those kind of conflicts between uses, so that everybody has a good sense of what to expect in the future and feel like their real estate investments that are made with, you know, kind of informed information, informed viewpoints. We just wanted to list here some of the benefits we see and opportunities for changing land use. There may be local needs that you've thought about already in giving your responses to Survey 1 that are important and ought to be considered in sort of how much development and where should it be located and what kinds of things would I want to see as a result of that. We also know that there are sort of impacts. There may be some front end costs in terms of water and sewer infrastructure, as well as other kinds of impacts that come as development is built or as uses change, even as agriculture changes, you know, the traffic or kinds of activities that happen on that may evolve in the years to come based on how the industry continues to evolve. So kind of getting right now at the heart of alternatives, we want to use alternatives as a tool to say that there's choices for what the future might look like, what the future land use pattern might be. And it's one thing to sort of think about them in your head kind of cognitively, but it's another thing to really draw them out, put them on paper, and then have conversations to evaluate sort of the good and the bad of each of them, and then decide from those from that discussion, is there one that really suits a region the best, or is it some combination using pieces and parts of a couple of different patterns that really makes the most sense? So right now we're at kind of the step 2 evaluation point, but based on that information, what we see come back from survey 2 and the discussion that the committee will be having in the next couple of months, they'll be the ones then to sort of make that either selection of one of these patterns or some adaptation or hybrid version. This is really kind of the key question. It's not a polling question for tonight, a little premature for that. But we want you to know that as we head into the next survey, this is really what we're kind of trying to get at. Which of these alternatives offers the most benefits and which has the fewest or most manageable impacts for us to consider. Keep that in mind as you look at these next couple of map images, and I'll walk you through these alternatives. I want to talk first about the baseline. What are our kind of assumptions for future land use planning? This is our existing land use pattern as it was mapped by our planning team using information from York County from April 2020. That was the most recent data set that we had. So here you can see Interstate 83 moving kind of not quite directly up and down north-south through the planning area. All of this purple area is existing industrial development and the footprint of the parcels, not necessarily the buildings. There's certainly some green space included in each of those properties, but that's the general location of where industrial development takes place. Our planning area is a little brighter in color than some of the areas at the edge, but you can still kind of read those colorings down here just south of the planning area. There's some additional industrial development as well. The red is commercial, so that may be an office or a service based in a building, whether it looks like an office building or just a small structure. May also be some retail. So we see a number of smaller parcels in through Manchester Borough and here along George Street, but also a couple of others in the outskirts of the planning area. The blue areas, the brighter blue, is public and community uses. So here we have municipal facilities such as Mill Creek Park down here at Mill Creek and Canal Road. There's also several church properties here in the vicinity of Susquehanna Trail at Canal Road and those sorts of things. So those are examples of kind of public and community uses. Yellow is residential, much of it single family, but some of it, some attached units and maybe some converted homes that have apartments and so forth in the borough. And then the brown area is the agricultural or sort of natural open land in the planning area. So I just wanted to walk through those colors in terms of our existing pattern. We needed to make, we had some information about development that's somewhere in the pipeline, either been proposed, has been recently approved, maybe even has just started construction. So we have a map of these several parcels within the planning area and some others at the periphery that we wanted to keep in view, not exclude. So as we think about our assumptions for what's going to happen in the future, we felt that these were fairly predictable, that these were going to occur. A few of them are new construction, some of them are expansions of existing facilities in some of the industrial areas. But what we did was we shaded all of these then to look as a kind of a future assumption for an existing foundation for further land use planning. So I wanted to share that as our assumed baseline. Let's get into the three alternatives, and I'll give you a bit of a description here about each one. And we've given some acreage changes estimated up here in the upper left. Alternative 1 is the one that offers the most area for continued agriculture or other opportunities for economic value, economic products to come from open space uses. So those are the tan areas. Those are, many of them over here in Cotawago Township, some even in Manchester Township at the bottom of the planning area here, and some even in East Manchester, just west of the borough, still remain in this particular scenario. We've used a striping pattern to show where new uses are presumed in this particular alternative. So we have yellow striping for residential uses, and we've kind of shown some infill in a couple of areas, in a couple of pockets, adjacent to other residential areas. Maybe it's build out of a subdivision that we know is on paper improved but hasn't built out yet, those sorts of things. We show a few areas for, I guess one particular area over here just between Manchester Borough and the large industrial area with an orange stripe for mixed use. So maybe that's a combination of office and some retail future opportunities. There may also be some higher residential housing, higher density housing in that area. Maybe there's a scenario where there's some retail and office on the ground floor and maybe some apartments above to offer some modern apartment living in this particular area. It might play out something like that. And then there are a few areas where we show some future industrial uses. I'll point out some examples here between Bear Road and Interstate 83, and some additional lands that are zoned for industrial already in East Manchester Township, and right here around the interchange as well. Now, we're not saying exactly these parcels and only these parcels in any of the alternative images that we're sharing tonight, but we're trying to sort of put a spot on the map and say this kind of use generally in this vicinity, would that be a good thing? Is that something we want to consider, or might it be a different use than we've shown here? So the first alternative focuses more on limited future development. Certainly takes some strong zoning administration for that, but some continued agricultural opportunities, open space opportunities as well. I remind you that we're trying to think far out into the future, something like a 2050 kind of planning horizon here. Alternative 2 shows more areas for future development. I'll remind you again that not every structure covers a parcel entirely. There's certainly buffer yards, side yards, and so forth that include green space in any of these areas that we might illustrate. But again, we've used the yellow striping to indicate areas where future residential development might predominate. So much of it in sort of the western part of our planning area, a little bit in East Manchester on kind of Canal Road, extended north there. There's some additional residential areas shown as well. We've expanded the areas shown for future industrial use west over to Susquehanna Trail from I-83, as well as some further industrial use east of 83 in the East Manchester in toward the borough. There are more mixed use areas shown on this map here in Conewago Township between Copenhagen Road and Susquehanna Trail, maybe somewhat along Susquehanna Trail as well down in Manchester Township, and maybe a slightly different pocket of mixed use over toward the borough. This particular alternative, we've got kind of a chunk of commercial, future commercial. Again, it could be a mix of office, could be services, could be retail. Commercial becomes the big umbrella term to show for future land use. Here, kind of northwest of where the interchange would lie. We'll see this pattern change a little bit as we go to alternative 3. This particular alternative shows more in terms of future industrial acreage, quite a chunk for residential. And we prepared this in response to some of the market and stakeholder perspectives that we've heard about to give somewhat of a different viewpoint as to how future development might look in this area, where it might be located in the general uses it might be characterized by. Alternative 3 is a little bit different. Here we scaled back a little bit on future industrial development. There's kind of between 1 and 2 in terms of the amount and some of the locations. In this case, we put a sort of a bigger chunk of commercial between Manchester Borough and the industrial area. Maybe that serves as a buffer. Maybe that brings in some new commercial uses right into the population center of Manchester Borough. And again, then sort of more residential uses in the western part of the planning area, perhaps more opportunities for mixed uses to try and accommodate growth, but in tighter, slightly more dense areas, and still allow, relieve the pressure on some of the agricultural lands in the far west part of the planning area. None of these alternatives really speaks to ag preservation. Tracy mentioned that kind of large scale preservation we heard was really a challenge. And I think we shared in the first public meeting that their priorities for ag preservation in York County or elsewhere in the county, not in this particular planning area. That's not to say property owners might not do things on their own, but with the need for housing and so forth, we wanted to be sure to show some alternatives that address that need for housing in a mix of housing, not just single family residential, but a mix of different types as well, and in some different locations. So these 3 maps we will be posting to the website hopefully tomorrow, no later than Friday, so that if you want to look at them in greater detail than what's available in the survey, you can. In the survey, you will be able to zoom in and out to some extent. But again, I would say the focus is not on what any particular parcel is shown for. It's more general areas and amount of future uses that we're looking for your feedback. So I know that's a lot to kind of absorb. It's a lot to think about 2050 when we're stuck in 2020 with the conditions that we're all living in. But we wanted to kind of walk through each of those alternatives again, place it in the context of long range. What would be kind of the ultimate land use pattern into the future? If there's any questions that we can help sort of clarify your understanding at this point, we can take a few questions here. And like I said, we'll post these maps up, the alternative maps up, so you can take a closer look at them either before or as you're working on the survey in the coming weeks. So Jay, do we have any questions coming in? And folks may need a minute, just to get their thoughts together and type something into the Q&A feature of Zoom here. But let me know if you see anything there that we need to address.
No current questions, Michelle, but like you said, we'll give folks a minute or two, digest what you talked about, and if there are questions, type them in the Q&A and we'll read them live. We do have one actually, just came in as I'm speaking. Does the plan include a dead end at the end of Bear Road is the question.
Yeah, so that's really, I think, a design question for PennDOT in terms of how the interchange, what footprint that interchange would ultimately take. First, if it's approved, and then B, if it's funded. That's not per se that's anything that we're answering with our land use plan. It may have some influence in terms of what people see as kind of a land use pattern. I know as we were talking with the municipalities, and kind of going over these alternatives, we talked about access to how tight the creek is right there at Canal Road, just west of the interchange. So that access point, whether Bear Road connects there or traffic would have to go around, may have some influence on land use, but we're not able to make that determination in this particular spot. If Will Clark has anything further he wants to say about that, I'll let him chime in, but that's been my understanding to date.
No, Michelle, that was exactly right.
Okay, thanks. Anything else, Jay?
Yeah, we have another question. How heavily do you consider the wishes of the residents? Is the question from Matt.
Sure. Matt's very vocal tonight. We thank you for asking those questions that perhaps other folks are maybe timid or not type fast enough to type. So we don't have a formula per se for sort of percentage that we're giving to public survey results. It's going to be up to the elected officials on the committee to make those decisions. We want to present to them the information that perhaps they don't have the time to assemble, to speak with different stakeholders and so forth. We've already started some conversations about what are the impacts that most concern them, and that's going to be one of the questions for the public as well. So it will be some balance. I think if there are, as we work further through this and we get to the draft land use plan in January, your thoughts on that shared with your elected officials, your planning staff, your township managers or borough managers, that will be helpful to them in sort of hearing your voice as well. But we're providing kind of the vehicle to kind of gather all of those perspectives and at least lay them on the table for them. Thanks. All right. Well, we want to give you kind of a preview for what Survey 2 is going to look like so that when it opens up for you on your screen, you have a sense that I'm at the right place. I know what to do on each of these screens because each one is a little different in terms of how you might interact with it. I'll remind you that the survey will open up, I believe, later this evening with a link from the I-83 Exit 26 website. And I'm going to open up a little demo here, and I'm going to turn it back to Tracy so I can catch a drink for my voice, and then we'll wrap it up here in a couple of minutes. But she'll walk you through this.
So as Michelle said, this is a demo for the second public survey. It's going to open after the meeting tonight. So it's in MetroQuest, and it gives you 5 screens. It gives the respondent 5 screens to go through. The first screen is a welcome screen discussing the project. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there is information regarding the land use plan or regarding the I-83 master plan that Michelle spoke about earlier. And at the top of the screen, it says that this survey asks you to rate the potential benefits and impacts of land use change and to evaluate potential patterns. So that's the first screen. And then respondents will move on to the second screen, which is identifying land use benefits. So as land use is developed in an area, there are changes in land use that can improve a community, and survey respondents are asked to identify through the use of stars what's important to them. Are local jobs important, housing options, open space, green space, larger tax space. So people have 20 stars in which to place on any of these land use benefits that are most important to them. So that'll give us a sense of what are the things that are most important to folks from a beneficial perspective. And then the next screen talks about land use impacts. So what are those items or those potential issues that are associated with land use? So in this screen, a survey respondent will be able to drag up 3 items that are the most important to them. So are higher utility costs, school taxes, light noise, longer travel times. So you'll be able to drag 3 items up to the top of the screen, and you can also provide additional comments. And at the bottom left, you could suggest another land use impact. So that is the third screen. And the fourth provides details on the future land use alternatives that Michelle reviewed. So you will have the opportunity, or any survey respondent, to rate each of these future land use scenarios. So the first is alternative 1. And you'll be able to zoom in and out of the alternative to get a better handle of the area and the location. And if you click on the legend at the bottom of the screen, it will give you the legend for those striped areas that Michelle talked about. So the residential, mixed use, commercial, and industrial. And then at the bottom right, you'll see indicators. So when Michelle was talking about each of these future land use patterns, you saw that the increase or decrease in acreage. So an arrow to the right, which is green, shows an increase in acreage from the base existing land use. And then an arrow to the red shows a decrease in acreage. And again, you'll be able to go through each alternatives. And if you really like alternative 1, you might want to give it 5 stars. If you like alternative 2, give it as many stars as you would like. So that is another tool that we'll use to provide some idea of which of these 3 land use alternatives people prefer. And then the final, and you can provide general comments, additional comments regarding that particular land use alternative. So please use that box as well. And then the final is a wrap-up screen. So it asks respondents, and this is optional, to provide their zip code, where they live, where they work, age group. And then you'll see at the right-hand side, we have a link to the I-83 Exit 26 Land Use Plan project page for additional information. So that is a quick synopsis and demo of Survey 2.
Thanks, Tracy. I think it's always useful to, when you're asked to do a survey, one that's particularly visual, to know that you're in the right spot. You're at the spot where folks want you to look at things and you have some sense of the feedback that they're looking for. So I appreciate your walking everybody through that. When you go back to the I-83exit26.com website, you can, there are icons, I believe, on the page to share that page with other folks you might know who live or work or travel through the planning area. And we appreciate your help in kind of publicizing that so that we can get as much input as possible through the closing date for the survey, December the 12th. So we've got just about a month to complete that. We'll be taking a look at those results. That's what we'll be doing over our holiday break. I don't know what you all will be contemplating, but we'll be downloading those results and working through those. Another opportunity for questions here. If folks have any sort of need to clarify what we're looking for in Public Survey 2, wanted to give just a last chance for questions, and then we'll close out the meeting here in just a moment.
Michelle, we do have another question. The question was about which elected officials should we be speaking to have our voices heard. Can you remind folks about which municipalities are involved in this process?
Certainly, certainly. So there are 4 municipalities in this particular planning partnership. Chuck Zitnick spoke for Conewago Township, East Manchester Township, Manchester Township, and Manchester Borough. Now, Manchester Borough doesn't have land right at the interchange. The other 3 municipalities are all sort of certainly within 2 miles, but really they all have land quite close, within probably 1,000 feet or so. But Manchester Borough is, kind of the population center nearby, and the street network, the road network that connects there's exits 24 and 28, and potentially in exit 26. Really that's their access to the interstate system too. So it was important to bring them in into this planning partnership to think about not only the land use pattern, but some of those associated traffic kind of generation that comes from that land use pattern in the future as well. So those are the 4 municipalities. Their logos are all shown on the website, I-83exit26.com, and they're listed there. So folks can check back there if you need to revisit that particular point. Any other questions, Jay?
All the questions I see, unless we want to give folks another minute or two to get in any of those late questions before we wrap up.
All right, well, I'll say that I just want to thank everybody for their time and listening in tonight. We thought it was important to provide more than just a survey. That's important, and some of you might think it's very intuitive as to how to walk through it. But thinking about sort of the long-term future requires kind of setting aside today's issues and challenges and really thinking about sort of the lasting legacy of what all kinds of uses have for this planning area and how they will come about into the future and what folks would like to see as part of their community, both near and long term. So we appreciate you letting us present this for you. Chuck, do you have any closing remarks before we close up the presentation?
Yeah, certainly. We want to thank everybody that participated. There's quite a number of folks that are online. If you had specific Conewago Township comments or questions, you can call the township office. But really the smart thing to do is take survey number 2, because this is questions that are nicely ordered. It takes a little bit of time to work your way through, but you express an opinion that is easily understood to the planners that are working on this. So we would appreciate that, and good evening to you.
Great, thanks so much, Chuck. We really appreciate having you as part of the planning team tonight. Everybody have a good evening, be safe. You may or may not be traveling, but we look forward to seeing you again in January. Thanks so much.